Good afternoon, everybody. This is Precious Benali from the Tribal Youth Resource Center. I am the co-assistant director, and with me today is Laura Guay, the presenter for today's presentation, our online learning event on secondary traumatic stress prevention and mitigation. She is from the National Native Children's Trauma Center in Montana. And also with me is my colleague from the Tribal Youth Resource Center at TLPI, Laura Smith. She will be assisting us with the technology aspects of today's webinar. Thank you all for joining, and you're in for a really great treat. Laura Smith, do you want to walk us through the housekeeping reminders?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. This is Laura Smith with Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and I will walk us through some housekeeping reminders to help ensure that this online learning event goes as smoothly as possible. So first, just to note, your control panel will appear on your user screen. Also to note that all attendees will be muted during this presentation. That will allow us all to hear Laura and Precious more clearly. In order to get the audio going, once you call into the meeting call line, please enter your PIN number. Use the questions box on your panel to submit questions and responses during the presentation. During the discussion portion, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon to signal that you would like to share a question. And to minimize the control panel, use the orange arrow at the top left panel.
So here you can see our beautiful pictures. To introduce myself, I am the host of this online learning event. Again, my name is Precious Benali. I am a citizen of the Diné Nation, originally from northern New Mexico, but I currently live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm the co-assistant director of the Tribal Youth Resource Center at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. And your facilitator for today is Laura Guay. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Precious said, my name's Laura Guay. I work with the National Native Children's Trauma Center as a training and technical assistant specialist. I'm thrilled to be here talking with you all today and learning from you about all the wonderful work you are engaged in.
Thank you very much. So we are here as part of the Tribal Youth Resource Center. It is a project sponsored by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, commonly known as OJJDP. This project is a partnership led by the Tribal Law and Policy Center. We partnered with the National Native Children's Trauma Center out of the University of Montana. We have staff that have expertise in a multitude of backgrounds. We offer a wide range of training and technical assistance. Our team is really special in that we understand the complexities of Indian country and the histories that Native folks in this country bring with them. And so with that understanding, we're able to provide really special type of training and technical assistance to both the tribal youth program grantees and healing to wellness courts and all federally recognized tribes. Next slide, Laura. Yeah, at the core of this project, we carry with us the value that our children are sacred. We make sure to carry that understanding with us in all of our work with tribes and tribal practitioners. So we try to bring also our understanding of indigeneity to the approaches, our training approaches, the practices that we support, and also understanding that culture and traditional understanding provide a really strong foundation for helping our people and addressing the challenges that Native youth face in today's society. So with that, I just want everybody, there's a lot of us on the attending this event today, and I kind of just want to get this chat box, the questions box rolling. If everybody could just kind of give me an idea of where you're from or what tribal nation you are affiliated with, that would be awesome. So if you could see the questions box in the thing. Oh, hello. I see everybody. We got Meskwaki, Blackfeet, Santo Domingo, New Mexico, what up? Morongo, Bad River in Wisconsin, Bakutare. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining and thank you for participating. Please keep it coming. I want to see where everybody is from. Man, from everywhere. That is great. Knighty. Thank you. So I'm going to let Laura take this away. And please feel free to ask questions as we go. You'll be prompted throughout the presentation. We have some really great discussion questions that will be popping up throughout the presentation, but if something that you hear Laura present about, you want to learn more about it, please use this questions box to ask us a question, and we'll be sure to get those questions addressed to you throughout the presentation. Again, thank you, and thank you for participating in our very first mini question here. Take it away, Laura.
All right, thank you, Chris. Good day, everyone. I just wanted to thank each of you for being here on this webinar today and making time for a discussion on secondary traumatic stress, what it is, what we can do to both prevent and mitigate the symptoms of it by really planning for our own self-care. A little of my background is Precious had introduced me. My name is Laura Guay. I'm with the National Native Children's Trauma Center. And my work really revolves around trauma-informed systems change. I had about 10 years in the child welfare world prior to my time at the trauma center, and so that's really the background I'm coming to you all with as a child protection specialist and working in rural communities. But my time here is really focused on helping systems support trauma-informed services and practices for the youth and families that they're serving, embedding those practices into systems instead of just individual people who may be trauma champions. So that's really been the focus of my work for the last several years. I'm excited to be here with you all and really be learning from you about the work that you're doing. So during today's webinar, we're going to talk about the importance of acknowledging and addressing secondary traumatic stress. We'll look at definitions, identify contributing factors, and learn possible signs and symptoms. We'll look at the 3 stages of addressing secondary trauma and wrap up by considering benefits of truly radical self-care. Because secondary traumatic stress can be a webinar, or excuse me, we're on a webinar. Secondary traumatic stress can be a mouthful. You'll hear me throughout the presentation refer to it as STS by its acronym. Okay. I'd like to begin with some of the reasons it's so important we talk about secondary traumatic stress. Many people like you in helping professions may wonder, why is it so important to focus on your own potential for secondary trauma when the trauma and needs of the clients you serve are so high? Oftentimes professionals will put their own needs aside in an attempt to best serve the youth and families they work with. And then on the flip side, many of you have probably an intuitive sense that the effects of secondary trauma are common in the field you work in, whether it's within yourself, recognizing it in colleagues, or the overall function of your organization. The reality is that left unmanaged, secondary traumatic stress has the potential to impact us personally, professionally, and organizationally. Taking care of ourselves supports longevity throughout the workforce, which is one of the best ways to ensure we can truly help the youth and communities we serve by increasing the experience and expertise in the field. I'm going to share with you guys a quote that I think really highlights exactly why it's so important we talk about secondary trauma and its impacts. So here it is. It's the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. The Children's Trauma Training Institute identifies 3 stages in the process of coping with STS. The first stage is knowledge. That involves the acquisition of information and prevention skills related to secondary trauma. You guys will accomplish stage 1 by participating in the training today. Stage 2 is recognition. It involves the identification of your own risk and exposure to secondary trauma. You guys will get pieces of this during and after this training through your own self-reflection, through peer support and supervision. Stage 3, responding, involves applying the skills that we talk about today and consider what that self-care looks like for you and for your program as a whole. But of course, accomplishing these 3 learning objectives is only the beginning, right? The training is a starting point in what's going to be an ongoing long-term commitment to promote a culture around secondary trauma prevention and intervention for yourselves and within your organization. To acquire some basic knowledge, we'll look at the definition of trauma and consider what trauma in the workplace looks like. We'll also define secondary trauma and gain some insight into what potential indicators of secondary trauma may be. So in the 2 previous online learning events, my colleagues Ashley and Marilyn both defined trauma and spoke to the importance of a trauma lens when working with at-risk youth and families. A key component of a trauma-informed tribal system or trauma-informed service providing program is to have a universal understanding of trauma, what it is, its prevalence in the populations we serve, and within ourselves. Beyond this, of course, is knowing how trauma can impact the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of ourselves and our clients. So in an effort to keep our trauma goggles securely fastened, as my colleague Marilyn would describe it, let's start by reviewing what trauma in the workplace may look like. Trauma is the actual or perceived threat to the physical or psychological safety of a person or their loved one. These threats to physical or psychological safety produce feelings of terror or a complete sense that you've lost control over yourself and your body. It's important to note that how a person makes meaning of trauma influences the reaction to it. So 2 people can really experience the same event and have different responses to it, largely influenced by their own past trauma histories and their current level of physical safety and supportive relationships. In the workplace, it is possible to experience trauma from the work that you do. Examples of this might be an assault that happens by a client, or getting into a car accident while transporting a youth, receiving verbal or written threats that threaten your own safety or the safety of your family. I'm sure you all have many more examples of trauma, what trauma can look like in the workplace. But remember, what would make one of these events traumatic is how the person it happens to makes meaning of it. We want to acknowledge that trauma can occur while on duty and encourage you to know the resources available to you as employees or within the community. I mentioned personal trauma today during a presentation. I mentioned personal trauma today during a presentation on secondary trauma because our own trauma histories increase our risk to the effects of secondary trauma. That's not to say if you're on this webinar and you're a person who has experienced very little adversity that you're completely immune to the effects of secondary trauma. But knowing our own histories does empower us to take prevention of secondary trauma seriously and ensure we are present and capable as possible for those who need our help and in the moments that they need our help. So secondary trauma differs from firsthand trauma in that it's the result of bearing ongoing witness to a traumatic event or series of events that another person experiences. For the context of this presentation, we're talking about bearing witness to the traumas experienced by the youth, the individuals, and the families that you're working with. Though that's not to say it could not happen through personal relationships as well. This exposure looks like a youth disclosing abuse and neglect that has happened to them, to you. It may look like reading graphic police reports or court reports, maybe seeing pictures uploaded of abuse or neglect that may have occurred. And it may happen from reviewing files. And it often happens listening to colleagues debrief graphic details about what's happened to their own clients. Any professional who works with people who've experienced trauma, especially children, is in a position to hear the recounting of traumatic experiences, is at risk of secondary traumatic stress. Risk does appear to be greater among women and among individuals who are highly empathetic by nature. Your risk is also increased if you have unresolved personal trauma histories. For professionals who carry a heavy caseload of children who've experienced trauma, or for people who are socially or organizationally isolated. Your risk is also increased if you feel professionally compromised due to inadequate training. This slide provides some additional factors that the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Courts and Tribal Youth Programs workforce may be impacted by. So take a look at these, because I think we're going to hear from you in a minute. Which of these might resonate most with you? All right, so threats of violence, having clients who aren't cooperating, receiving lots of criticism about decisions being made, and of course making decisions that have a big impact on everybody involved. So I'm going to move to the next slide. Which just is a question of whether or not any of those factors that were just listed resonate with you, and if not those, others that might. And I'll toggle back to show you that list, but go ahead and chat those in.
So while we wait for some folks to enter into the questions box, my background comes a lot from the Healing to Wellness Court and treatment court background. So a lot of the secondary traumatic stress that I saw was from the very nature of treatment and a treatment court. Relapse is a very big factor in that. It is very common. It's something that we understand to be true. But when you pour your heart into your work and you see not as many successes as you do failures, a lot more terminations, or a lot more people not showing up to court, very few graduation, that just kind of weighs on you, and you start questioning, why am I doing this work? And you see some of those also coupled with a lot of those other factors that were in the previous slide, kind of just builds up on you. So I see a few folks have entered some stuff in. This is a big one, fear of not enough training. We definitely get that. A lot of folks, we don't have a lot of time to go out to training. So we're just trying to, trying to do what we can with our experiences, but always having that fear of not knowing enough, not staying on top of the latest and greatest advancements in your field. That is definitely a factor impacting. Somebody asks, having to deal with the relative who has a DV-related relationship with someone who is unstable and has no boundaries. Exactly. You bring that with you. You're dealing with stress and seeing somebody that you love being put through this traumatic experiences, and you do bring that with you. exposure to violence or stories of childhood abuse of the client. Also high caseloads and caseloads involving human-induced trauma. Yeah, you read and you hear these stories at work over and over and over again. You're already an empathetic individual because of the work that you do, but to hear these stories again and again and feeling like you don't have a lot of power to fix it really can have a big impact. Could SDS be me witnessing my uncles physically abusing my grandma? Exactly, yes. This is, again, somebody that you really love, and somebody just like some youth folks that are powerless, being taken advantage of and being abused, that will definitely affect you. And somebody asked, can we repeat the question? Here Laura put it back on the screen. So these are factors that impact secondary traumatic stress in involvement in justice systems. Yeah. So let's see. Here, somebody shared, when a client is terminated and they are sitting a significant amount of time and seeing their families cry for them, especially their children when they are arrested. Also seeing the impact a termination has on the family. Yes, exactly. A termination, especially, you feel such elation when somebody enters a program and they're doing really well, and for one reason or another, they get terminated. All that hope is gone. And then you see the ripple effects throughout the family and throughout their support system, and you as somebody who is helping them through the process. That will weigh on your heart for sure. Thank you very much, everybody, for writing in questions. My apologies if I didn't get to all the questions or all the comments. But thank you again.
Thank you, Precious, for going over those. I think everything you guys talked about is spot on, right? The work that you all do is helping people who are currently grieving, who might be suffering, who have experienced really traumatic events in their childhood, and that work is so hard to bear witness to in an ongoing way, and then still be that person who provides them strength and offers support. So as we move through this training, we'll talk about ways we can manage our own experiences so that we're best positioned to help those around us, right? Because a lot of times being affected by other people's suffering is a normal reaction, right? It's abnormal to have to experience the amount of trauma that a lot of the people we work with have. What is normal is our reaction to it, right? That it does impact us. So we'll hopefully give you guys some tips on really assessing where you're at on experiencing secondary trauma and ways to manage it. So thank you guys for participating in that. So the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress mimic those of post-traumatic stress disorder, as though a trauma happened to you. Symptoms may manifest in our emotions or how our bodies physically feel, our home life, and work performance. Recognition of these potential indicators is key. When we know what to look for, we're more equipped to prevent the experiences of secondary trauma. And if we recognize that we're currently experiencing these symptoms, we can take some actions to begin our own process of recovering and healing. Experiencing traumatic stress, even as a result of secondary trauma, can make it more difficult for us to regulate emotion. Anger and sadness are common among workers who are suffering from secondary trauma, as are long-term struggles with prolonged grief, anxiety, depression, and hopelessness, and sometimes even emotional numbing. Sometimes these emotions arrive out of the blue without a particular precipitating event that we can trace it back to, and sometimes they're triggered by reminders of traumatic events that we ourselves may have experienced. And sometimes these ways of being, the sadness, the anxiety, the depression become so routine, part of our lives, just ingrained within us, that we have a hard time connecting it to the experiences we've had bearing witness to other people's suffering. So due in part to the increased arousal levels and stress hormones within our body, like adrenaline and cortisol, secondary traumatic stress can cause physical symptoms. It's the chronic mental strain that may result from secondary trauma can lead to things like headaches, stomachs, being exhausted, or on the flip side of that, being hyper alert on the balls of your feet at all times. And a compromised immune system. So this might look like getting sick more often than you used to, even if it's just a common cold, but not being able to fight off bugs quite like you used to. Of course, sleep troubles, right? If you're bringing some of the work into your dreams, some of the troubles that you know exist in the world into your dreams, it can be harder to get a good night's rest. STS can also cause negative alterations in our behavior, and these can become especially noticeable in our relationships with others. We may project blame and mistrust onto those closest to us, experience mood swings, become easily irritated or intolerant, and develop a cynical attitude. These and other interpersonal effects of STS can lead us to isolate ourselves from our relatives and friends, and as a consequence, we lose access to that much needed support network during the times that we need it most, right? Some of the workplace indicators that exist, we may avoid clients or places or situations that bring those events that are troubling to us back up. This might look like missing appointments or being late to work. We may lose faith in our ability to do meaningful work, and we might see our motivation to do the work diminish. With our coworkers, we might become quicker to anger or become more argumentative than we used to be. And overall, if we're suffering from STS, we're just not likely to function at our peak productivity. This can have an impact on our coworkers, spreading negativity and dysfunction across kind of the program or agency that you work with. And to wrap all these, the emotional, the physical, personal, and workplace indicators that exist, these changes aren't, these things that don't always happen in the immediate, right? They can take place over a longer period of time as you continue to work and hear stories and are exposed to the traumas that other people have experienced. So it's not typical that these happen overnight, but rather over, several months or years of working in the field of trauma where people have experienced trauma. STS manifests itself in the judicial process and in many ways that have the potential to influence outcomes for the clients involved. It could look like judges or attorneys and advocates not considering relevant information, or losing the ability to recognize when others, like a client or a jury, aren't understanding the information being presented. And of course, the consequences of this can be life-altering for those who are standing before the court. Another risk of unmanaged STS is bias. When those involved in the judicial system develop cognitive biases, which, when surrounded by others who are experiencing STS, are considered normal versus the bias-based nature that they are. So if this is occurring, it impacts the adequacy of services that clients receive as they're moving through a court system or through a tribal program. Now that we've spent some time doing the hard work about gaining knowledge about what STS is and some ways it might manifest, we'll move into talking about some tools that are available to measure and monitor symptoms of secondary trauma as they affect us as individuals and as the symptoms affect and impact the organization that people are working for. There are many ways to assess for the experience of STS and the impacts it has personally, professionally, and organizationally. Informally, individuals can use their own self-reflection skills and knowledge of the symptoms we just talked about to check in with themselves about how they're doing. Have they noticed that they're avoiding certain clients, or are you feeling constantly low energy? Self-reflection is one of those low cost and simple practices to engage in, but it also takes practice to get good at it. Reflective supervision is a method of supervision that in part focuses on processing the staff's emotional reaction to the work. This has been shown to be effective in many settings to support staff and increase the capacity of the workforce. One of the things we do like to point out is that we recognize supervision is not always available for those in the field. Constructive debriefing amongst colleagues is another informal method to assess and manage STS. The key, though, is to avoid sharing horror stories and focus on processes versus outcomes. Seek feedback about client complexities that's strength-based and creative, and focus on the emotional reactions to the work while avoiding shame and blame of clients, colleagues, or management. There's also several formal tools to assess individual levels of STS and organizational levels of STS. The first one mentioned here is the Professional Quality of Life Survey, or ProQual as we call it. It looks at STS symptoms as well as burnout and compassion satisfaction. It asks a person to consider the last 30 days when answering the questions, and it's a good tool for individual to use and self-reflect on how they're coping with stressors of working with those who have experienced trauma. It's also useful in supervision or peer support amongst colleagues. You can take it at 30-day intervals and get a sense of if you are struggling, right, more so than, say, the month prior, or if you are doing better than the month prior, and then use those self-reflection skills to ask yourself, what's different, right? Am I doing different self-care activities, or have some things shifted on my caseload to alleviate some of the stress? And start paying attention to those things so you know when you're operating kind of at your peak performance. The secondary traumatic stress scale is another similar tool for individual use. It's a little bit shorter, and it attempts to measure STS by itself. So it doesn't look at burnout, and it doesn't look at compassion satisfaction. And it consists of 17 questions that you answer on a scale of 1 to 5 about your experience in the work, both emotionally and cognitively, over the last 7 days. This last one here is the Secondary Traumatic Stress Informed Organizational Assessment Tool. And that really looks at the organization's response to STS. Are there policies and procedures in place to support the wellness of staff who work there? And how equipped is the organization to respond when staff are experiencing symptoms of secondary trauma? This tool is an excellent way for programs who want to formalize their commitment to a trauma-informed approach to their services and acknowledge and respond to the impact secondary trauma can have on the employees working there. Here's just a picture of the ProQual, the Professional Quality of Life Survey, to give you guys a sense of what it looks like. We also have these uploaded in the handout section so that you could print them off and use them if you wanted. I will say that there are a couple extra pages of this ProQual that show you how to score it and then how to interpret what your numbers are and what they might suggest. So you guys can get a sense here of what kind of questions they ask. And again, this tool is meant to be for individual use, but maybe something that's used in supervision or mentorship to gauge how you're doing and if things are shifting around for you. So to recap some of the general signs that your stress level is increasing and that you may be impacted by STS, I think many of these are really relatable. Do any of you go to the worst case scenario in your head faster than you used to? Have you taken time off for yourself recently? Or do you avoid time off so you don't have to manage any crises that occurred while you were out of the office? Is getting a good night's rest a challenge because you're going over and over again the worries of yesterday and the worries for tomorrow? Have you found that you don't socialize as much anymore? All of these are pretty classic signs that the effects of working in a field where you're exposed to the suffering of others is impacting you. But don't worry, we're going to talk shortly about strategies to address this and find support that alleviates some of the negative symptoms. All right, it's time for another discussion question. So if you guys could take a moment and practice one of these informal strategies we talked about, the self-reflection. Consider these questions. Think of a couple ways your life gets impacted by stress, whether it's how it manifests itself physically in your body, like headaches, tiredness, some consequences to your personal life, like not socializing as much, not connecting with your family or your friends quite as often as you do. And then maybe any ways that your professional life might be impacted. So if people are willing to share, go ahead and chat it in, and Precious will help kind of debrief some of your responses. So time to practice some self-reflection.
All right, so while we wait for folks to input their stuff, I will share mine. So I tend to be a very stressed out person a lot of the time, but my stress really peaked when I was in law school. And one of the major signs that symptoms that my body would go through is shaking. And my hands would just shake like I was hopped up on caffeine, and I really didn't have that much caffeine in my system. Also, I was a stutterer when I was little. And my stuttering tends to get a lot worse when I'm stressed out. And ways also within my environment, I'm a very tidy person normally, but when I'm stressed, I don't care that my house is a wreck. And the same can be said for my professional life. If I'm stressed out, you'll see my desk. It's disorganized, it's chaotic. I lose track of just the organization. All my projects get all mixed up, and things start falling through the cracks. So stress impacts me too much. So I try to do a lot of self-care that Laura will be discussing later on. So folks are here inputting some things. Somebody says, stress for me shows up as a tick in my eyelid and eyebrow first. Yes, I definitely know what that feels like. It is so annoying. Man, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Says I have tension balls in my upper shoulders. I also have anxiety attacks when I'm in super tense situation. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the upper shoulders is where you keep a lot of your stress. You can feel those knots there from just being tense all the time, and anxiety attacks that can really affect your personal and professional life as well. Somebody says worrying about the kids at my club all the time. Yeah, these kids are under your care, and you know so much about them that you constantly worry. You probably stay up at night worrying about them. That impacts your once you get home, you continue to think about them. So you're also bringing work home with you, which just kind of snowballs the stress there. Somebody says running a boys and girls club for 6 years, putting the club and youth before my health and family. Yes, this is classic stuff that folks were really invested in their work do. You invest so much time because you see all these folks all these kids don't have enough. So you want to be putting more than enough into your work, and you can see the detrimental effects for both your health and your family. Somebody says my body sometimes will cause me headaches and fatigue. Personally, I come home and may vent, which includes more explicative language when I'm frustrated, and professionally I will have trouble. Let's see, sorry, I can't really read that. I'm sorry.
When I'm frustrated and professionally, I will have trouble being productive or not wanting to be around some of what may be causing the stress.
Yes, definitely. I know when I'm stressed out about a big deadline and I have projects, I will avoid my boss at all costs. I will not go by their office sometimes, and that's not a good sign because I like my boss. My husband says leave it at work. That's a good tip for sure, but when you're so invested, that is very, very hard. Somebody says Personal, not being able to unplug. Exactly. Professional, unorganized, forgetful, tired, so stressed out. Man, when you're that stressed out, you get tired, all you want to do is take a nap, you know, close the door in your office or hide under your cube to avoid all that work, right? Let's see. So someone says, when my backache shows up, I know I'm stressed. My house is neglected, and professionally, I really don't want to do anything and avoid some tasks that are being forced upon me, or having someone, not my supervisor, complain about some of my duties consistently. Yes. And when you're thinking about that and you know that you're an awesome colleague and you do great work, you get even more stressed out because you're like, I know I'm letting my colleagues down. I know they're counting on me, but I'm dropping the ball. But how do I get myself to do these tasks? I know when I'm stressed, even just little things like sending out a meeting invite, I will put that off because it's yet another thing on my to-do list that I don't really want to do. And I suffer from backaches as well. So I definitely know what that feels like. So man, we're all some stressed out people, aren't we? So thank you, everybody. But luckily we have Laura here to help us through some ways to cope with all this, some self-care. Oh, and the last thing, somebody just put this on here, says, I feel guilty when I take a day off. Right, you know, your office is understaffed, you don't have a lot of resources, you are maybe the only person on your team, and if you take a day off, these kids aren't getting the needs, or aren't getting the services that they need, or aren't getting the support that they need, and it's all on your shoulders. So you're like, oh, I can't take that day off, I can't close my door, or I can't do any of this. They need me 100%, and I need to be on 100%, and all that pressure, oh my goodness, just exacerbates that stress. So I'm getting stressed just thinking about it. Laura, go right ahead. Please say it gets better.
All right, I was going to say, we got to change the topic or Precious is going to fall apart here. Thank you for debriefing that, and thank you for sharing all of the ways that you all notice stress show up in your life. It's so important that we connect with those pieces, right? That we reflect and check in with ourselves, because there's nothing worse than not being able to see stress showing up, right, and beginning to this end point where you've gone over the ledge, and it's harder to get back to a good and centered place. So thank you guys for participating in that. I think just everything you came up with really highlights how self-reflective you already are about paying attention to your bodies, paying attention to what happens in your personal life, paying attention to how stress impacts you at work, which is just such an important piece to the puzzle. So it's important that we do attune with ourselves about the specific and unique ways to us that STS can manifest within ourselves, because that guides us towards how we prevent it and mitigate unwanted symptoms if they're already present. So we've gained knowledge about what STS is, we've reviewed symptoms to help us recognize when we may be impacted, and now we're going to talk about how to respond. Self-care is so crucial to prevent and mitigate the impacts of secondary exposure to trauma. I like this quote here that describes self-care as an ethical imperative and an obligation to our clients, to ourselves, our colleagues, and our families to not be damaged by the work that it is we do. So we'll talk about the ABCs of self-care: awareness, balance, and connection to support our wellness. And we'll look at how to incorporate elements of each of these in caring for ourselves regularly. The A in the ABCs of self-care stands for awareness. We cannot know how to mitigate STS if we aren't sure whether or how we might be affected by it. Some of what we've covered so far has likely led you down the path to a greater awareness of how your work affects you, or at least given you space to think about it. Well, I hope that some of what I've said has served that purpose. True awareness is dependent on you. You're the world's expert on your own stress levels, your own trauma experiences, your personal relationships and professional functioning, and of course your physical and spiritual well-being. Developing a greater awareness of these aspects of your life is the first step towards preventing the development of STS symptoms or mitigating any symptoms you might already have. So in order to become more aware, you may need to cultivate this habit of stillness and inwardness to allow yourself the time and space to reflect on what's happening internally for you. One of the things you may need to think through is your own history of trauma, acknowledging that these experiences indeed do have an effect on you and may be reawakened in the course of your professional life. As a routine feature of your day or work, work week, try to step back from your immediate concerns and evaluate how well you're managing the stresses of your work. The more regularly you take time to take your inner temperature in this way, the more skilled you'll likely be at identifying those forces that affect you on a daily basis. All right. I hope you all are not getting tired of chatting, because here we have another opportunity. This is an activity that was developed by a colleague of mine. Her name's Deb Kleeman. It's called Between Zen and the End. And what it aims to do is help us identify what it looks like when we're doing amazing, right? We're at peak performance at work, our home lives are jiving really good, we feel great physically and emotionally. We'll call that our Zen, right? Like where are we at physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, behaviorally when we're at our best, when we're in our Zen. And then what does the end look like, right? When you have reached beyond your capacity and stress has kind of consumed you, right? When you've just reached max capacity. What does that look like in some of those same categories? How do we physically feel when we're at the end of our rope? Or what happens to our relationships? Do they begin to suffer? And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the warning signs are, which is typically the hardest thing for people to identify, right? We know what it looks like when we're doing awesome, and we know what it looks like, or maybe our relatives can tell us what it looks like when we're not doing so great, but we struggle to see the signs that we're moving out of our Zen and towards the end. So if you guys would be willing to chat into the box, and let's start with your Zen. What does that look like when you guys, how do you know when you're doing great, when you're at your best?
Well, I think this is a good transition because I definitely can talk for so long about how stressed I am, but man, when I am Zen, it looks good, you know. I have a routine. I go to the gym consistently. I cook food at the house consistently and healthy foods. My dogs get walked regularly and often. Somebody here says, I open the mail when I'm good and I do the dishes, right? Dishes are fun. They feel great when you're feeling great about your life. Dishes are the worst when you're not feeling great at all. What else does Zen look like? Zen is my house being clean, me being able to walk by some dishes that are laying on the table and putting them right in the sink, or even just doing them right there. Yeah, somebody's on that same wavelength. My housework is done, including laundry, right? Laundry is so easy when you're like listening to awesome music and your house is clean and you get to put it right away because there's no chaos getting in the way. I wake up with energy. Man, that sun is shining. You're excited to tackle the day because nothing is in your way. You're not bogged down. Man, that's really great. What else? What else does Zen look like for everybody? Do you have dogs? Do they get taken out more often when you're Zen? Hey, Laura, what does your Zen look like?
Yeah, I would say I'm social, right? I'm connecting with my family more. I'm connecting with my friends more. Um, and I'll use this to just kind of transition to the other side of the spectrum of what it looks like when you've reached capacity or you're over capacity and stress has consumed you. So my end looks a lot like kind of becoming a hermit, right? Not wanting to connect with people so much, really rather sitting on the couch and watching TV than going out and getting coffee with people. And then on the flip side of that, at work, I'll drink coffee all day long, right? I think it's because I'm more tired and I just feel like I need something to get me closer to Zen, right? Like almost like a chemical get closer to Zen through all this caffeine. So yeah, if people want to type in what their end looks like, that would be great.
All right. So we had some really great Zens while you were talking, Laura. Somebody says, feeling grateful that life is going so great and being thankful, talking to my grandson, and art. Somebody said meditation. Really thinking about themselves, I think, is what folks are talking about. Somebody says, I honestly think I'm at my end, wishing it was Friday on Monday, wanting to stay home. Yeah, that happens for me too. I feel like when I'm at my end, I don't want to even get up that Monday. I dread the rest of the week. I look at what meetings are on my calendar and already I just want to stay in bed for sure. Somebody says, okay, I think we're going to talk about the warning signs later. My end, somebody else says, my end, no motivation, waking up with headaches or worries about the day. Exactly. My end looks very much like a lazy slob. I don't want to cook food. I order all the time. I watch way too much television. So when you hear me talk a lot about what's happening on TV the past 2 weeks, then that's how you know I'm super stressed out because I'm avoiding everything. My end is not wanting to be at work and dealing with negative people, not wanting to leave my house. I think when that happens, right, you start snapping at people. You start really getting aggravated at work and questioning why you're even there.
Right. So those are all really excellent examples, and again, normal responses to the impact of working in trauma fields, right? When people being exposed to the trauma experiences others have had on a daily basis, these are really kind of normal reactions to the work. And there are things we can do about it through self-care. But a big piece is being able to self-reflect and understand specifically what it looks like for us. Because we can give you scripted definitions of what it might look like, but really taking the time to look inward about what it looks like for yourself is going to be what helps you create the plan to pull yourself out or avoid developing some of these symptoms that we've talked about if you're maybe fresh to the workforce. So this last piece, identifying our warning signs. So thinking more about, we're not at the end, but we're certainly not in our Zen place. What sort of signs do you guys have that you're starting to get to capacity? What are your warning signs?
So somebody said on the chat that my warning signs are mail is unopened, computer games and television instead of art and friendship activities. Yeah, stuff that is sort of mindless, a lot of passive activities and neglecting things. I do the same thing. Simple tasks that would have been really simple that I could have gotten done in the morning, like answering quick emails or writing a quick memo. Those seem super super huge tasks, so I don't want to do them, and they keep stacking up. That's how you know when you see my work inbox with more than 50 unopened emails, that's how you know I'm on my way to the end. Somebody says putting reports off until the last minute. Yep. Indigestion and face breakouts, not taking my healthy supplements. Yeah, that happens. Like stress causes your skin to do some crazy things. You start producing too much acid in your stomach. Trust me, as a sufferer from stress for so long, my body probably aged 5 years. Says wanting to go home and sleep and ignore household chores. Yeah, when you're just trying to get through the day without tearing somebody's head off, or with trying to not quit, that's what all your energy is doing. So you're just zapped by the end of the day. You just want to sleep. Somebody says morning signs, neglecting to prepare for my day, rushing in the mornings rather than prepping the night before. Yeah, you forget your food. Did you even pack food? Did you even do all of this stuff? These are things that you could easily see if you're like, man, I've been buying lunches so often because I keep forgetting. You're like, that's how you can step back and be like, all right, maybe something's happening here. What can I do to pull myself back and get back to my zen? All right, Laura.
Awesome. It sounds like you guys have really got a good pulse on what some of those warning signs are. And this activity isn't actually uploaded onto the webinar now, but we will send it out to you. We ran out of space for attachment, so this will come out to you guys. I think it's a really good one to start doing some of that practice of self-awareness and reflection. And if you're struggling to think of what some of your warning signs are, ask your coworkers, ask your family, because your kids might know, or your spouse might know, or that coworker that sits next to you all day might have a good sense of when they can tell you're starting to become overwhelmed and reach your end. So awesome. Thank you guys for doing this. I just think the more practice we have looking inward and seeing what it looks like when we do good, what it looks like when we're not doing great, and some of the warning signs in between, we can start to interrupt these cycles. And we'll make sure this activity worksheet comes out to you guys in an email following. All right, so if that activity was a little bit hard for you, here's just a funny little thing about the top 10 signs you're too stressed. I think number 6 is one of my favorites. But your best friends think you've moved away because they haven't seen you in so long. And number 7 is definitely, what a colleague would say to me, is when they know I'm too stressed, when I've got a Red Bull as part of my balanced diet. So that's just your funny for this online learning event.
I think number 10 is definitely me. Vacations are never long enough. And I think by day 8, I'm like, all right, I think I'm ready to start this next year at work. And then I get to work and I'm like, nope, I need another vacation.
All right. So that activity between Zen and the End helped us understand our personal warning signs of stress, but what about those warning signs within the programs or organizations that we work with that might indicate secondary traumas present? On the screen are some possible indicators that STS might be impacting an organization. So high rates of turnover or absences, extended leaves, ongoing conflicts between coworkers, or maybe between field staff and administration, and an overall low office morale. So what these have the potential to ultimately lead to is a decline in the quality of services and supports provided to clients. That third formal assessment we looked at, the Secondary Traumatic Stress Inventory Organizational Assessment, it's in your upload area of the webinar, is one way that a program can evaluate how trauma-informed the organization is about STS, and it really, the results of it provide some actionable information to start making some changes organization-wide. All right, the B in the ABCs of self-care stands for balance. Proper self-care depends on finding and maintaining a balance between the various parts of your life. Often our work squeezes out other parts of our lives. It can happen because we're working longer hours than are healthy for us, but it can also happen when we're working regular hours and just can't stop thinking about the work at night and on our weekends. Though we may feel like we're being productive in these situations, in reality, we are at our most productive when we're least likely to burn out, when we balance our work activities with personal and family life and leisure activities. Developing an awareness of whether the various parts of our lives are feeling balanced or unbalanced is a crucial step. If we determine that we're feeling unbalanced, we can take some steps in the right direction. For example, we might develop a better sense of our work-related limits, like the number of tasks we can handle at one time or the amount of overtime we can work, and then become more careful about maintaining those boundaries. Similarly, we might create clear boundaries between our work and home lives by leaving work on time and keeping our focus on the family and friends we see after work. We might need to brush up on our time management skills so that we can finish our work tasks in an efficient manner, leaving more time and energy for the other things that matter to us, like engaging in activities that really restore our balance rather than activities that help us cope but also create other problems. Substance use and other compulsive behaviors can fall into this category. So as we develop some self-care plans, we want to try and replace any negative coping activities we might use at the moment with positive social relaxation and leisure activities. All right, so everyone takes care of themselves in different ways that are unique to ourselves, right? It's important for us to figure out what works for us as individuals, but we've selected several categories here that we feel are important for balance. So some of us might default to one area over the others, right? We might be really good at taking care of our physical self by eating well, exercising, and our social life might be harder, right? Maybe it's harder for us to reach out to people and connect with them. What people do in each of these categories is really personal, but I think it's also important that we do have something in each category to maintain that balance that we just spent some time talking about. So I'm hoping you all would be willing to jump in again and share what are some of the things you do for your personal balance in across these categories. How do you take care of yourself socially or spiritually?
All right. Yeah, one of the easiest things that I go to, that is my go-to, is the physical stuff, right? What I like to call the low-hanging fruit, because a lot of the other stuff for me takes a little bit of extra work. But an easy thing is just taking my dogs for a walk. I guess that kind of feeds the emotional self-care side of things, because I care for my dogs. I want them to be happy. And when I'm not taking them out because I'm stressed, they're just not healthy or happy. So I'm helping both of us by taking longer walks in the park, getting the exercise I need. So folks have here spiritual, smudging and praying. Yes, that is something that always clears my mind too. There was a time where things were just getting really heavy at work, and I was bringing that work home, and my home just got a little bit too toxic because I had negative energy, and I just smudged and really meditated on the thoughts I was bringing to the house, and that really helped a lot. Another one, taking a mental health day if needed. Yes, exactly. Work is going to be there. You know, folks are going to need you. You know, when you are on the plane, they tell you to adjust your air mask first before helping somebody else. You got to take care of yourself so that you can take care of somebody else. So taking that mental health day, separating it. And when you take a mental health day, take it. Don't think about work. Think about you. Read a book, go lounge in the park, watch a movie, you know, walking with friends. Yes, exactly. I love walking with friends and my dogs. They're, well, my puppy dogs, they're furry dogs, and my friends. Being social, right? Being with friends and family, giving somebody a call, Texting may work, but hearing that voice is awesome. Somebody practices Aikido, which is a defensive martial arts, once a week. It is physical. It focuses on connection with your partner, so you get that physical exercise, but also that connection with somebody. I used to be in Taekwondo. My mom put me in Taekwondo because she said I had too much negative energy and to get it out on the bag and during sparring, and that really helped for me too. Somebody here says, when I'm driving home, there is one swoop on the road that naturally helps me leave work and not take it home. Changing my clothes as soon as I get home. Loving on my bossy pups and getting into our routine of being home. Yes, 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 yes. Changing those clothes to comfy clothes. Out of those blouses and those pants that, man, that just remind me of work, and getting into some clothes that allow me to walk with my dogs really fast, you know? Oh man, bossy pups. Tell me about it. Love them.
All right, excellent. And I think as you guys look at this, you'll notice like a lot does cross over, right? You guys talked about walking with your dogs or getting outside, and yes, that's a physical activity, but that it also fuels your emotional self, right? Because you get to pet those guys and feel good about that connection and relationship you have. So there's a lot of crossover with different activities. It's not that all activities fall into one category, but I really appreciate you guys doing that, and think through which of these areas you didn't have so much to talk about, right? If it's the social or the spiritual or not knowing how to take care of yourself professionally, and use some of what your colleagues here on the learning event have come up with, and consider what that might look like to incorporate something new into your self-care plan. And then the other thing I would say is think through what you can do of these things on a daily basis. What are some things that make more sense to do weekly because they might be more time consuming? And then what are some things that might be monthly or revolve around the calendar year for different times of ceremony and whatnot? So think about that, because there should be things on your self-care plan that you could do at the drop of a hat, because they only take 30 seconds, like a mindfulness activity, things that you might do daily, weekly, and then kind of around the calendar year. So taking a deeper look at achieving some balance professionally, we have some specific tips here. The biggest thing is never lose focus on the big picture. It can be easy to get nearsighted with the specific youth you work with or the challenges you might have engaging the school. But remember, there's a larger purpose to your work. Acknowledge and accept the scope of what you can do within your role. And remember that specific outcomes don't always reflect the change you are helping youth and families make. So like a youth may relapse, but this time they have a mentor that they're able to tell immediately. So here you have what some people may see as a negative outcome, that relapse, but it's also important we recognize that the youth had someone to go to when it happens, and perhaps this means that they get access to treatment sooner. So really focus on those processes over the case-specific outcomes can be helpful. Maintain boundaries how you're able. Don't check emails at home. Make sure if you find yourself triggered by the experiences of a client, you're checking in with your supervisor or colleagues to address it. And if you just got out of an intense family meeting, use your next hour to file paperwork or organize a case file. Try to avoid doing the same activity consecutively to give your head and your heart some time to rebuild. The C in the ABCs of self-care stands for connection. It can refer to relationships, to community, and to spirituality. Self-care dictates that we seek out and maintain positive connections in these realms, both at work and in our lives outside of work. We should strive to make our close relationships supportive and nourishing. And while this may seem common sense, the reality is that when we're suffering from STS, many of us develop a tendency to withdraw from our relationships and support systems. Thus, it's worth reminding ourselves that conscious conscious intention and maintenance of our relationships and support system is so crucial in preventing and mitigating STS. Community connection can also serve as a powerful protective factor against STS, as well as against a range of other negative mental health issues. Engagement with traditional culture and concern for well-being of the tribe as a whole have been found to really enhance well-being with some statistical significance. Participation in a community group or activities, including those related to traditions and ceremonies, represents a particularly promising avenue for mitigating secondary trauma. And similarly, a sense of spiritual connection can powerfully counteract the effects of STS and provide a foundation for long-term maintained self-care. So it might mean connection to a traditional spirituality, to ancestors, to a higher power, or to nature. Nourishing our sense of spiritual connectedness helps us restore a sense that our work and our lives are meaningful, and that gives us ground for hope. All right. So we know that the strongest indicator of resilience and recovery from trauma is relationships, connections to our relatives, connection to our mentors, connections to peers, or to whoever it is that we feel supported by. One thing you may do after this training is create a list of all the relationships and connections you maintain with people throughout the week, both in and outside of work. Then draw a circle like a pie, a relationship pie, and create space for each person or each group of people according to the portion of time you spend with them. And then ask yourself, is that in alignment with what you want it to be? Are you spending more time with your coworkers than you are with your family? Are you spending more time thinking about your clients than you are with your friends or social group you might be connected to? And the last element of that is to really think about how to nurture those relationships you cherish so that they'll continue to be an ongoing source of support for you. Some ways organizations can support connection is through training and forums to discuss STS and the specific impacts on staff and the program. Create opportunities to celebrate with colleagues, could be birthdays or professional accomplishments, and promote the use of vacation leave. Put effort into providing effective and supportive supervision. And of course, if supervision isn't available, create space for colleagues to dialogue about the work in productive manners. Formalizing a debriefing process for when a critical or intense incident occurs can also support that connection amongst colleagues and supervisors and others who are working with the client. If the program you work with then has the infrastructure to support supervision or mentoring between veteran staff and incoming staff, investing in this will really help and increase a sense of connection, build the skills of staff, increase retention, and ultimately improve services offered by the programs to the clients they serve. I think it's important to also acknowledge that some programs may not have this capacity for supervision, and my guidance there would, one, be to consider what it would take to implement supervision or a mentorship program. And in the meantime, how do you create co-learning opportunities for staff? Could look like presenting a challenging case and problem solving, whatever it is that's challenging about that case. Maybe it's how to engage or creative ways to get clients to appointments or just to support them in general. It could also look like selecting a relevant article or topic that's going on in the community and discussing it as a group. Supervision There are challenges to engaging in self-care. We often fill our heads with thoughts like, how can I take time for my own self-care when so many of my clients need my help or are in such great pain themselves? We may find ourselves filled with guilt when we take a day off or shame when we return and learn that crises took place while we were out. We may also compare ourselves to our colleagues, and if they're seeming to manage the work, why is it that we can't? This line of questioning often prevents us from taking care of ourselves in a way that will prevent STS symptoms. So with that acknowledged, let's talk about developing a holistic self-care plan. We went over these before a few slides ago. We built some awareness about what fuels us across our personal domains. So take a moment to reflect on what you thought about and then consider incorporating these things into daily, weekly, and monthly self-care strategies that you can use personally. And remember to think about the categories that don't come naturally to you and challenge yourself to try something new in this area. Also think to the responses that your fellow colleagues shared on the chat and incorporate something that is new to you, but you'd be willing to give it a try. This work is hard.
Laura, can I say something really quick?
Yes, absolutely.
So I've been doing a lot of reading and research on how habits get formed. And we all have this ideal self, things, habits and habits that we want, that we see our best selves having. But to form these habits, it takes a long time and a lot of willpower. So if there's something like Laura said that takes, that is out of your comfort zone, take small bites out of it, little steps, because little steps will get you somewhere. What happens a lot of the time are folks do a big, massive change that is unsustainable, and they tend to be a lot harder on themselves than when they first started to pick up that habit, because they're like, well, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at self-care. I'm not good at walking my dogs every day, you know, and that just stresses them out even more. So, you know, take it easy. Self-care should make you feel better, not make you feel worse about yourself. So when you try to engage in something, take smaller bites out of it. And then soon those will snowball into something bigger and something longer lasting.
Yes, thank you. It's so important to have grace with ourselves as we're trying to incorporate some new things, or if we're trying to get back in the swing of doing what used to bring us a ton of joy but might have slipped away. So thank you for sharing that. The grace in all of this that we give to ourselves is so important, right? We're usually empathetic people engaged out in this work and in the trauma world, and so we tend to have a lot of grace with those we work with and not so much ourselves. So I think that's a super good point, Precious, that you brought up. So thank you for sharing that. Okay. So yeah, the work's hard. It's nearly impossible not to be impacted by it. The healing of our youth and families and the individuals we work with is just as important as our own. Find ways that work for you to make meaning of the experiences you have caring for others, whether it's through ceremony or traditions or counseling. The more we're able to heal ourselves through intentional practices, the better able we are to provide trauma-informed services to our clients. In doing so, we're modeling for our clients how to build their own resiliency because we've placed value on the importance of our own. Professionally, it's important for us to know what's available as employees, whether this is an employee assistance program that you can access to receive support, or support from a supervisor or a mentor. Another tactic is to practice recognizing and reframing when our thoughts have shifted to the more negative or cynical. An example of this might be a thought process or a comment where it runs through your head that it just feels like no one is ever to get clean, or no one is ever able to stop using. So if we could interrupt that negative thought and reframe it into something more helpful that isn't dismissive, that can shift our thinking to the more positive and optimistic. So a way to reframe that would be to change how you thought about it, to say, overcoming addiction is incredibly challenging and people need a lot of support. So there's a shift there, right? To feeling like nothing ever gets better, to it is really hard to find a level of healing and people need a lot of support for that. So some shift there in how you think about things to increase a sense of hope and optimism. Oftentimes people and personalities in helping professions want more control than we have. An element of achieving some professional balance is recognizing that there are some things we can't change or that we don't have direct control over. The examples here might be the number of cases you have or referrals you have to process or how busy your docket is. And it might not be possible to control the types of clients you work with or the providers that you have to interact with. Recognizing what's out of our control might be helpful so that we can shift our focus to what we can control, like our interactions with youth or how we advocate for clients in the courtroom or our interactions with our colleagues. And to wrap it up here, this is our kind of last slide of content. Here's just a little worksheet. Thinking about what you do to take care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your emotions. What are some things that you currently do? What are some things that you might consider trying? And there are a variety of self-care worksheets out there, right? If you were to Google them, you'd find a bunch with different categories. So I'd encourage you guys to do a little digging on your own or use this one. But we find that it's helpful if people print it out and write it down and post it somewhere. That act of putting pen to paper can help create some accountability and commitment to this work of self-care. So if it makes sense to put it next to your desk at work or on your fridge at home, think through where it would be helpful to remind you of what you want to do to take care of yourself and what are some new things you want to try. So with that, I just thank you guys for your time and your interest in this topic. I'm going to open it up for folks who have questions and hopefully it can provide some answers or have a dialogue about whatever it is you're interested in. So I think to ask your questions, go ahead and chat them in like you had been doing throughout the online learning event. So someone asked, is a self-care worksheet available in the control panel? It did not make the control panel list of handouts, but we will get that and the Between Zen and the End activity worksheet in the follow-up email where when the evaluation survey comes out. So yes, thank you. We'll kick that out via email.
So while we're waiting for more questions, just want to let you know that the Tribal Youth Resource Center, we are a technical assistance provider group. We provide culturally based and trauma-informed training, support, and technical assistance to all of our TYP and Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court grantees, as well as all interested federally recognized tribes. So if you like this training or want to know more about what we do, the resources that we offer, you can check us out at our website, www.tribalyouth.org. If you would like to request training and technical assistance, there is a button that will take you, on the website, there's a button that will take you to the online training request form. So take a look at that. So somebody asked, as an employee, how do I advocate for self-care days or mental health days if there are no policies in place for such things? That's a really great question. Laura, do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, a really good question. I think I'm reading your question here really quick, so I'll make sure I'm answering it.
I would approach my supervisor and really lay out the facts that in order to provide the services and to come into work with a clear head and to give it your all, there are times where you need to just take a step back, take a step away from the work. It's not forever. It's not for even a long period. It's just for a day, just so I can recoup, you know, just really laying out the reasons why it's better to advocate for clear mental health, and to have balanced and happy colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's such a growing body of research that really suggests when you have an organization where staff are under extreme exposure to secondary trauma, that without accommodations for that, like you know, self-care days or mental health days, as you referenced, that what ultimately can happen is people end up on extended leaves anyway, right? Because they're unable to manage those symptoms because they haven't been given an opportunity to do so kind of on a regular basis, right? So as their warning signs present versus when they're at the end and needing to go on like medical leave or whatnot. So I think if you did a little research, and there's articles out there, we could send some of those out too, just about how secondary trauma impacts organizations. I think that can be powerful for management or administrators to see that it's not just about how it impacts one single employee, but that overwhelmed with a staff of employees who might be overwhelmed by their symptoms of STS, that really can have consequences to how the organization functions as a whole, and then how the types of services that the clients receive who go to that organization for help. So yeah. Send them a link to this webinar.
Yeah, that was exactly a suggestion. Laura, somebody asked, can we also get a copy of the STSS assessment mentioned earlier? I don't see it in the handouts box.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Just a quick personal note about the asking for mental health days. I used to be really hesitant in taking and asking for a mental health day. But once I was able to be really honest with my supervisor and really get it out there, like I'm feeling a little stressed, things are getting away from me, is it okay if I just take a day to step back and think about me, and then really come back after and just attack the work? And we both saw an improvement in a lot of the work I was doing, my attention at work, and how I felt about the work was really different once I was able to be honest with my supervisor, and that really did a lot. So if y'all are like me and feel a little bit weird about asking for a mental health day, really sitting down and having an honest conversation about how you're feeling and how you can be a better professional in your field, I think that will go a long way.
Right, the last is that you guys are going to get an evaluation about this online learning event and your experience. And a piece of that will be whether or not you're interested in a community of practice. And that could look like a lot of different things, but meeting with some regularity, whether it's monthly or quarterly, to talk about in more detail some of what we talked about today. So keeping in line with secondary trauma, though if you're interested in other community of practices, please share that as well. But we talked about different tools to use to measure how you're doing and how your organization is doing around secondary trauma. We might, in a community of practice event, we might spend time digging more into those tools, how to use them, how to measure, what to do with the data that comes out, and how to make changes within the organization. We might talk about ways to build peer mentorship groups when you don't have supervision available, and really find that as a group of staff that you're struggling with secondary trauma. We could spend some time talking about ways to build each other up on that peer level, if supervision isn't available to you or mentorship isn't available. We might look at things like secondary traumatic stress policies you could implement in a program to create some sustainability with a trauma-informed approach to secondary stress for employees. So those are just some ideas, but if you're interested, make sure you add that into your feedback for this event. And if you're interested in other topic areas for community of practice, that's helpful for us to know as well. So with that.
All right, thank you everybody for sticking with us. I hope you took a lot out of it. It was really great to be here hosting with Laura, and I learned a lot of great things, and I hope you did as well. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Laura Smith, for helping us with our tech needs.
Thank you, everybody.